Hello! It's good to be back here.
Hello!
Hi.
It is great to be back here.
Yep.
Hello.
Mic check,
It's
mic
my
check.
first time.
Yep. Hello there, good people. I see that there are some conversations already happening in the chat, which is great. That means we already have guests. And today, me and Ryan are having a tiniest bit of a anniversary. This is our 10th stream, I'd say.
It's a big step. Big step in our relationship.
Yeah, so, let's get started then, I guess. Today we're going to talk about virtual productions in Notch. And I am here not alone. So this is me here in a corner, Armin. Ryan, you probably already know if you've seen some of our streams. And we have a guest today.
Hello.
Will Smith. He's
The original.
the original Will Smith. Will has an abundance of experience when it comes to materials and texturing and modeling. He spent majority of his professional career in a gaming industry.
Yep.
So we are very happy to have him here. He's a part of that Notch team, and he will be sharing some great insights when it comes to optimizations and general virtual production 101. So it's gonna be great to have him here. Okay, so I'm gonna go for slides now. I have this little slideshow prepared for you here. Let's start off by talking a little bit about what is virtual productions. It's a simple screen replacement via AR using LED backdrops or tracked cameras, or it could be full XR with front plate, back plate setup. So this could mean many things to a variety of people. Now, we're going to talk about several scenarios, and we're going to focus on virtual productions for live entertainment in this stream. So with that said, I have to mention that virtual productions was on the rise for a while, before even we got into a place where we are now, which is being closed off at home and having no live events whatsoever, aside of the ones that are happening online. And obviously, if we have the ones happening online, they are likely inspired or altered by virtual productions. So this is good for us. So what we did in accordance to this need in the market, we actually focused a little bit more on the virtual productions internally in Notch. If you haven't noticed, we've been silent with the streams for a while, and there's a good reason for that. We all were hands-in working on this quite a lot. So we're happy to say that we made a patch release that delivered a lot of good tools and good techniques to make virtual productions easier via Notch. So I'll let Ryan read through the things that we introduced in the latest release.
Well, we introduced quite a lot actually in the latest virtual production release. We've completely reworked the way that we deal with front plate and back plate. We brought in improvements to light baking and material caching so that we can, or so that you can much more easily create content and adapt content and create new content. We also updated the chroma keyer. We'll touch on that a little bit, but there's quite a lot going on under the hood there. And the big thing with the chroma keyer is how you can now use alpha blended materials with ray trace shadows and things like that, which is really neat.
Which lots of people wanted.
Yeah, we are happy to say that we spend a bit of time, and I think it actually is paying off. So just to strengthen the message or strengthen the patch release, we actually now have a dedicated page for virtual production. So if you type in notch.1.vp, you will be directed straight to that page, which is, well, literally all about virtual productions. So you will see some references, and you will get some TFX files and exported Notch blocks available for you there, completely free of charge, completely no obligations with the copyrights whatsoever, to do whatever you feel for, to use for your own productions. Now, since I'm mentioning the VP, we actually have a little showreel showcasing a couple of highlights from that, so I think we can just switch through and see that little reel.
Cheers.
I really like how Harrison has this little finishing wing there. So
it was fantastic.
Before we get hands-on, I'm just going to mention that there are many virtual productions currently looking for freelance notch artists. So if you do virtual production work, make yourself visible. Talk to us. Post your reel. Post something about yourself in our forum, in our social medias with the hashtag #MadeWithNotch. Yep. We want to see you so we can show you to people who are looking for virtual production specialists, because there's quite a few, and we're getting direct messages. Sorry, Will. Yes.
Yeah, there's some big projects out there at the moment, and there's a lot of people looking for talent in virtual production. So get your show reels onto the forums and let us see them. That'd be fantastic. Let other people see them as well.
Yeah, obviously. They come to us because they don't know about you. So,
so if we know about you, we can present you to the rest of the wide world.
The wide world.
Okay, so I think this is a good time to start going through things. Before we delve into the LED setups, I think it's quite important to talk about the chroma keyer. As mentioned in the very, very beginning, we have some advancements there. So, gentlemen, what have we done with the chroma keyer since last release?
So, there's been quite a few advancements in the chroma keyer. So, what have we done? There's just been a lot of stuff under the hood that's happened with that, just to make it work better. Our chroma keyer is actually pretty good. It's as good as some chroma keyers that are, some chroma keyers that are just in apps and stuff. We've done.
Yeah, I guess you mean that we are more or less comparable with the hardware-based chroma keyers.
Yep, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been improved to handle transparency and shadows and edges better, as I recall.
So with that said, I think it's worth to mention that we are using here Image Plane to actually show this goodiest of the boys, the dog. And from now on, Image Plane can not only be lit by lighting, because I actually have a little light here lighting up the scene, but it can drop shadows too. So if I come back to the image plane, you will notice that there's two brackets: cast shadow, lit. So this will help a lot to people who are working in situations where they have a 3D environment and they want to key in a person by green screen setup. Before I let Will go further about the best practices while doing so, I'll just mention that not only you can have shadows and lights reacting to your keyed image plane, you can actually have reflections on the 3D surfaces too. As you see, there's a little reflection of this goodiest or the goodest of the boys. And that's there's a little thing to remember, or there's a little thing to mention. The reflections are available via RT mirror reflection node. So you have to make sure to enable ray tracing and add the RT mirror reflection node. Now there's one more thing to mention about RT mirror reflection node that I personally like very much, and this is rather new, is the option to blur out the reflections. This is great. This is really, really handy. So, gentlemen, when you are working on a 3D environment which has keyed in person, what are good practices and what are good things to remember?
So when you've got a talent on screen, especially for green screen, it's really important that your talent doesn't move backwards and forwards. And the main reason with that is when the reflections and the shadows hit the floor, if your talent walks forwards, it can look like they're floating. So it's quite important that they keep on the same horizontal plane. Would that be? I suppose that would be the horizontal plane. If they go backwards and forwards, you will get a bit of floating. So it's important to do that. Just to keep in mind.
As you mentioned that, I think it's worthy to point out that there's more physical properties that could play with you or against you. So obviously, lighting is important. If you match your 3D scene and actual real-world lighting, that's going to help you a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Try and match up the lighting. All little things like that really help when you try and merge the two worlds together. If you've got harsh lighting in one and then subtle lighting in the other, you'll notice a difference. So things like that really help.
Yeah, and obvious things. If you're building a 3D scene and you're foreseeing this to be used with humans, well, try to build your 3D scene to scale. So hence, if there's a reference of a table, chair, anything whatsoever, a car, that should be in scale with the human. That's just going to help you down the line so very much.
I think that's important with any sort of virtual production scenes, whether it's chroma key, whether it's LED, always build to human scale. It's so important. You can really tell if, like, literally, if you build an object, you can go and find out how big it is on Google, build it to those units. 1 unit is 1 metric meter, 1 notch unit is 1 metric meter. So it's quite easy to follow. If you follow those rules, build everything to scale, you should have no problems.
One of the other ones, obvious ones to mention, is the dress up of your talent. Avoid things that would reflect the green color, and avoid the actual green clothing.
Avoid green.
I mean, this is obvious thing, but it's worth to point out and mention if you're making a memo for your customer before he comes to a shoot. Just send out a memo saying like, hey, please be aware that we're using green screen for this. Make sure to wear specific clothing, or not to wear green tie or green dress, you name it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the same rules with green screen, right? It's make sure you've got good lighting and that you separate your talent from the background.
Yep.
Like, they're simple rules, but if you don't pay attention to them, you just get yourself in such a headache and such a mess.
So
even things like making sure the green screen itself is pretty a linear green. If you're using cloths, like the one behind Ryan, there you go, there's a green screen, that would be rubbish. It's got lots of creases in it, lots of dark areas, and it'd be so hard to get rid of that out, to keep that kind of stuff out.
And I have tried.
I think
it's iron would do it.
I think it's worth to mention that angles actually sells the illusion of someone being in 3D space. So as you see, as I'm moving around, you can definitely see that this is a image plane. So once you're setting up your camera, try to align it to a point that actually makes sense with the 3D world. And if you're panning around camera, well, keep it modest, or just explore the boundaries, physical boundaries of things becoming unrealistic.
Or maybe even keep the 2D camera facing.
Yeah, or you can actually target camera with the 2D thing that you have on. But we could go a lot on and on about chroma-based virtual productions. But I propose that we switch through, or push another gear, and we talk a little bit about virtual productions with LED screens and LED floors. We're going to split this conversation to 4 important brackets. And we're going to talk you through from the start. So once you, let's say, get an order or you get a project, how do you go about it, step by step. So first it's going to be a talk about technical preparations, design work, the before you go checklist. It's actually quite important. I know it sounds funny, but it saves lives. And then on location work, which is equally important. So I would say that first 3 brackets is 50% of the work. The last one is yet another 50. So when I say that we are talking about virtual productions, I think this compilation of 3 stills explains it quite well. We have a person, Harrison, our team member, standing in the middle of the LED screen with the LED floor, and as you see, the space, LED space, is now facilitated with graphics, and all of a sudden everything else is facilitated with graphics as well. So basically, via media servers, you can not only use LED screens for projecting the virtual sets, you can actually have stage extensions too. So before we head to specifics of the preparations, is there general notes or general mentions that we would like to go through? Well,
for specific VP sort of LED stuff.
Just general notes before we actually go to the tech prep work.
So the you mean like the freeze geometry and things like that? No.
It's more like I would suppose that you should always consider using physical limitations of your space.
Yes. So a few things we've learned when going to site. You should always think before you go. You should always think about the physical limitations. Things like how big is the stage, how big are how much room you've got to move cameras around the space, things like that. It's a very important consideration. You can get yourself into a stage where you can't look around your actual 3D scene if the camera hasn't got enough room to move in the real world. So it's always important to check that kind of stuff out.
Would I be correct to say that you actually made a huge write-up about all these things in our manual? So I'm certain that if we were polite and would ask Ryan to drop a link to Virtual Production's manual page, you guys will have a chance to read up quite a bit of information about all things virtual production. We'll spend quite a bit of time making sure that we have this bread and butter, so we're safe and secure when we go on location. With that said, I think it's actually quite an important thing to use the limitations or the real world around you. Quite a successful case of virtual productions is Mandalorian. The reason why it looks so amazing is because it's a bit of a mix between virtual productions and the actual props on stage. So basically, to my knowledge, majority of the floors is actually real. So if there's sand or there's rocks, they actually build that and then they project projections in the back of it. So it's not like LED floor and LED walls, it's real floor with walls behind.
Yeah, things like that really help because you get free shadows, free reflections, things like that in your actual scene. So it's a bit of a cheat. So rather than using GPU power, you're using real world power to get all your shadows and things like that in the actual scene. So it's quite a good little technique.
Yeah, it's funny that we're referring to the real world as the cheat.
The cheat. I know.
That's a good point.
It's free stuff.
Free stuff, and of course it makes it more believable. You can spend hours and then achieving the best 3D looks and renders, but copying the real world is rather hard. But if you can merge both, you're actually in a winning sequence, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. It's so much better to do things like that, to actually get shadows cast from lights in the real LED stage and onto the floor, rather than trying to do it through using your GPU power. It's a lot better.
Cool. So let's start with the tech prep. So obviously, when you get a virtual production on your hands, there are certain things that you need to communicate with your team, your customer, and make sure about yourself. So we call that sequence or that bracket tech prep. Let's talk a little bit about tech prep for a virtual production shoot. So tech prep for virtual production. So it's always good to go in, understand the resolution you've got to run at. You've also the frame rates you've got to run at. A lot of things like that are very important. Making sure that keeping when you go in, the floor of your actual scene should be at 000, and that is the floor that you walk on the LED screen. Before I let you go a little bit further, Will, I'm just going to mention, or I'm going to expand on your first point. I really do agree that it's important to establish the screen space, the FPS, and all these things, but it's not enough to establish those. For a successful virtual production, you should make a template for yourself and for your colleagues with these parameters locked in. And as you probably already know, we have a FPS tracker in Notch, and you can actually lock in specific resolution if you want. You can do that by project settings, rendering, and here you can set specific resolution you want. If you set it to a second property, scale filter output to window, it will lock up to that specific resolution. Why is that important? Is because once it's locked to that resolution, you know your exact performance, because by default, Notch keeps its viewport as a float. Notice that numbers changing. Viewport right there, it states 1244, and if I make it a little bit bigger, it states 1758. So making a template with technical things locked in, you're gonna thank yourself as you progress. So let's go further. What else should be in that template, or what else should you think about before you actually get hands-on with the design?
When you kick it all off, what we tend to do is build up a grey box, sort of basic grey box scene. And the reason we do that is because you can get the actual scale of the scene that you want to use. You can put in, like we've got a nice little scale character in there, which will really help understand like what your talent's going to look like in the scene. Is it too big? Is it too small? You can put in a bit of lighting in there. And what we tend to do is if we use a lot of basic building blocks to get these scenes built. So we call it grey boxing. You sort of grey box your scene in, get some building blocks in there that are like basic floor pieces, basic wall pieces. You see we've got a little staircase in the background just to give it a bit of architectural scale. So the human eye can understand the actual size of the location. And we grey box this all out, and then we can understand how it's going to work when we start testing it. So if you... Sorry.
I would just like to add to what Will is saying. The reason why you would grey box is because you are not perhaps aware fully of the general design idea that your customer or art director has. You literally need a technical setup to test things, to test camera, to test scale. You literally build a grey box world with positions for props. So you know that you have some things in the front, you know that you have some things in the back, you know that this is the scale of a human, so you use a human model. And obviously these things will help you down the line to understand and to track performance. Because with these tests done, you can establish what is your overhead room for actual design.
Yeah, it's also a really quick thing to do as well. Grey boxing and notch is so quick to do. You can knock something up, get an understanding of the space. If people don't like it, you can redo it. You can change the shape. Also, we've got all the like points of focus on this as well. So we've got the big screen at the back. Does that LED wall work there? Like our LED wall within an LED wall, if that makes sense. So we've got some piped in layer pre-comp type things that we could put on that back wall. So same with the screens to the right, and it's important to see all that stuff.
I'll just point out that we didn't build this grey boxing scene for the sake of this stream. This is actually available for you once you turn on Notch. If you when you're prompted with a welcoming screen, your latest projects, templates, and samples. This is literally a sample. So grey boxing is a sample available for you to start and work with. And as Will mentioned, all of these different elements in this setup is actually modular. So if you need to build your own... Exactly. Lego. So once you need to build your own set, you could easily take this as a starting point and just go with it. Rearrange it, remake it, and start your project. Now, I'm going to mention one more thing.
I'm just going to jump on that. All those pieces within that scene are all like UV'd, so you don't have to worry about light map baking. We've done it all for you. All you need to do is put pretty textures on it and put it in the layout or configuration you want. And it's all there. It's all working. So
with that said, so you would have a better day. We actually did some homework, or we did some homework so you wouldn't have to do homework. So in the VP page that I mentioned, notch.1/VP, you will find quite a few scenes available for you as DFX files.
I think it's /virtual production, not VP.
You can type in VP or virtual production. It just depends on how lazy are you to put in the whole name of the thing. Anyways, there are scenes with ready for musical acts like rock, pop, a little bit of electronica, some TV broadcast setups. And I would like to mention there are scenes that are literally just the compilations of different props that might come handy in your scene building.
So we put some props and stuff that you can use as well. We put those together, made them all work, and they're all optimized, working, UV'd. As we said, all of these things you can use within your scenes. Yeah,
so likely you already have props that you usually use for your productions, but to make your day easier and to make that grey boxing process a little bit faster, all of these things should help you out. So basically you have a starting point, you put things together, you see how your space looks, you see how your space feels, and you're good to go. Now, back to the technical limitations of the real world. I think it's important to talk a little bit about location scouting or knowing your location.
Yeah, so I think I touched on this a bit before. It's really important just to get an idea of your location. Sometimes you probably won't be able to get a lot of the answers. Like, obviously you can get how big are the LED screens, things like that, but you might not get things like where are the trusses, where are the pillars, where are the walls for your camera movement, as I was saying before. And things like that are quite important, that you understand what you can do there, even right down to what sort of lens you've got on your camera. Can you get a wide enough angle on your scene or on your talent? Can you zoom into your talent? There's a lot of things you should consider before you set up. Also, lighting rigs. Can you use the lighting rigs to light the talent automatically within the scene? Just little things like that are all very important before going on location.
It's important to know the tools that you'll have.
Yes.
And all the different ways you can use them.
So you probably see this little markup of red lines that I have here. There's a good reason for that. When you're building your grey boxing or virtual scene, it's likely good to know the physical limitations of your screen. So you know where's the actual screen and where is the stage extensions. So this markup right here directly corresponds with the still that we've seen right here.
Yep.
I just really like these stills. Cool. So, is there anything more to mention before we head on to the actual design part of the virtual productions? Have we spoken about lenses, by the way?
We had a little, just mentioned then about the lenses, making sure you have the right lenses on your cameras or understand the lenses. So one of the things you can do is set up your lens FOV in Notch, similar to the one on the shoot, and get the distances for how far the actual camera is on the shoot, and maybe try and work that out through Notch. You may have to do a little Googling to work out the conversions between the Notch cam and the actual real world cams, but it's pretty straightforward.
But you should definitely do that. You're going to thank yourself later, because you might build a really cool stage. I speak from experience. I built a huge set piece. It looked amazing. And then on location, it struck me that we have a lens that is not as wide as perhaps I would like to have. And of course, there was replacement available, but that's just something you should always think about. The actual camera props that you're going to have. So when you're starting to think about virtual production, physical elements play first, and then you adapt your 3D world to physical elements.
Yeah, definitely.
Ryan, is there anything else you would like to add here, or is there anything else we should expand on?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Okay, good. Moving on. Then the next bracket is the actual design part of things. See what I did there? We literally have the same scene with a little bit more texturing and all that.
Awesome.
So this is again available in a VP package. Download it, use it. Hopefully it's gonna come handy. So, Will, what do you got for us?
So one of the first things you should really think about when doing your project is you don't have to have it all baked in static like this. For this scene, it's all using ray trace lighting. Everything's baked in, and it looks really nice. Obviously, it's using high-end path trace lighting, needs to be baked in, but you don't have to do that. You can use dynamic lighting, and it's about this stage you just make that decision. Or you can use both. So you can actually overlap dynamic lighting on the top of baked lighting. We have some tutorials on that workflow that I'm sure we're going to send some links out for those.
Yeah, as we're going to cover specifics of... once we're going to get to a specific node that perhaps is new or is worthy pointing out, we're going to briefly check it out on screen. And I think Ryan will follow up with a link about it. So I'm sure that's going to be an option. Okay, elephant in the room.
I was going to give some examples. So this is a fully baked static scene. There's a bit of flashing lighting in there, but all the lights are actually static. If you go back to can you go back to the blue screen or
blue screen?
Yanni's box scene, glass box.
Yes, of course.
So that scene is that everything's real time. So that's the good thing about Notch. You can go fully real time, or you can go fully baked, and you're going to get good graphics either way. And Notch is very versatile at creating scenes like this.
I guess you have to ask yourself: are you going for a real world comparison, or are you going for abstract 3D crazy? And once you establish that, then it's easier to choose: should you bake it or should you make it dynamic? Both of the workflows both of the workflows can actually mix, and both have benefits. So it's very much up to you to choose, because both pathways are correct.
So and then once you've done that, you should also think about what kind of things you want exposed. And what I mean by exposed is things that you can expose so the media server picks it up. For instance, the back screen, you can expose the parameters on that, so you can pipe video into it, or you can we can expose lights in here, or you can do a lot of things. Once you've exposed something for the media server and put some parameters in it, you can change it live and dynamically. So
that's actually an exciting thing. So for people who are maybe new to Notch and stumble upon this stream recording or watching it live, Notch is a tool that allows you to control parameters live directly in another package, like a media server. So Green Hippo, Disguise, Touch Designer. There's quite a few to choose from. And the beauty there is that you get a copy of Notch engine and your design, and it's being played back in another system. So basically you don't feed NDI feeds, you don't feed video streams, you have the engine running inside of the other engine.
Yep.
Well,
and it's very powerful. There's a lot of things you can trigger. You can do a lot of things with those. So it's so you first decide on your lighting, then you decide on what you want to expose, and then you start looking at your asset preparation. So
I think the good reason to mention it so early, the exposing, is because you should probably pre-plan it. So I would always recommend having a little Google sheet of things that are exposed with the naming conventions. So you and your media server operator or your on-location team has a good reference on what to expect, because you might be building this for yourself, but if you're building it for someone else, these reference points comes so extremely handy. Now, when we talk about reference points, there are many ways to help yourself and your team out with these things. So we have a couple of things even in a node graph. For instance, we have regions. So this is literally a node, so you can mark up specific areas, you can give them names, you can give them color, same with the comments. Make sure to use all of these little tools to assist yourself and your team further down the line. This will help you a lot. Now, we're going to come back to exposing because we're going to talk about network editing. So that's another exciting thing, but it's further down the line in the optimization bracket. Let's talk about
if there's one thing I would mention actually when it comes to exposing, it's also just limiting what you expose and really think about what makes sense to expose and what doesn't. Because you get a lot of times where, like in support, we'll see like 50 different parameters exposed, and it's just, you're never going to use half of them. So
general rule before
makes it a nightmare for you if you're using it, and even more of a nightmare for whoever else gets it, because suddenly they've got a huge list of parameters.
To Ryan's comment, obviously you might expose those parameters because you need to control certain things in your scene. But again, we're going to come back to this via network editing, because if you're exposing parameter only for the sake of repositioning a thing, it's not worth it. Expose only parameters you need for running the show. All the other things, repositioning, recoloring, adding new things, recoloring things, all is done with network editing. We're going to touch on that. I really want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is probably hands down one of the most important things we're going to hit on in this stream. 3D assets. Purchasing of 3D assets, 3D assets preparation. How do you make them run well in real-time package? Because obviously just buying something with 1 million polys is probably not the best option.
No. I would always say buying assets is probably the better way forward. It just means you can do things a lot quicker. When you're building your scenes, buying some really nice assets, putting them into your scene is a very, very helpful thing to do. You do have to be very careful though. If you buy assets that are really high poly, it can be more work to get those to run in real time. So there are quite a few companies like Turbo Squid that actually will have game ready assets. So if you and they'll also have the asset poly count as part of the description. So if you go via a lot of those sort of descriptions, you should get what you need. If you do have high poly assets, it's not the end of the world, depending on how they're used. If you have a high poly asset that is very small, you hardly see it on screen, it depends. Basically, the rule of thumb is think about how big an asset's going to be on screen, how many polygons that asset's going to take up on the screen, how many pixels that asset's going to take up on screen, pixels. If it's like really high poly and only takes up a few pixels, then you've really got to think about whether you should have that asset or not. If it's like taking up the whole screen and it's high poly, it might be all right.
To quote Will, the best friend for optimizer is the delete button.
Yes. Yep. So less is more in a lot of these cases.
Will, you're touching on a very important thing, is the size of the asset. So if you have, let's say, a lamp that goes to the very back of your set, and it's 700,000 polys, and it's just going to be literally in the back, You're never going to have a close-up of it. What's the point of having it in such a high poly? You might want some details, and I know that there's certain techniques that can help you with that. So you can take a high poly object, and you can actually bake down, I think that's the correct term, no? Baking down the normals, basically. Take small details.
Yep. You bake the normals out and then apply those back onto a lower poly version of the assets. A lot of stores also do that. They'll have, it's called level of detail or LODs. A lot of companies will sell you a asset with several levels of detail. So you can take the high poly version and make a normal map from that to stick back onto the low poly version. Although some companies actually do that for you as well. So there's a lot of, especially in the games industry, there's a lot of companies that do this right and understand real-time assets production. So
one thing I noticed in the gaming industry that, for instance, the industry that we find, or I personally find myself much more often than in any other, which is the entertainment, where probably most of you are as well. There is no such occupation as optimizer. I don't know if it's the correct term, Will, but people who actually takes models, takes assets, and works them out for you in a specific poly number, in a specific texturing. Yep. This is literally an occupation for some people, and you can hire these people to help you out.
Yep. Outsource companies do this a lot. Asset outsource companies, they take assets and if you ask for assets to be built, you give them a brief, say I want this flower pot or whatever built, and then you tell them how many polygons it will be built at, or if you talk to them, they'll understand the application and they can suggest sort of poly limits to you, which will be helpful as well.
I just feel like mentioning that this is a very good potential business vertical for people who are looking to expand their offerings. So if you're good at modeling, this is definitely something you should let other people know about. Just, again, post it in the forums, post it in our Facebook user group. There are teams and people who will appreciate this, because when you get a virtual production ordering, likely you're limited with time. So any hands-on person who can address this elephant in the room is a valuable team member. I can promise you that.
Yeah, people will always need high poly assets. People
low poly,
high quality
assets.
So
people always want high poly assets, but what they need is high quality assets.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yep.
So
I
think
that's covered up for my fault.
I think
a good optimized asset, you cannot tell the difference between the high poly and the low poly in real time.
I think we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to give you a small demo of the way we are treating our front and back plate from now on. So when I say front and back plate, obviously here, I'm going to come back to these great three stills. You see that there's things in front of the talent and behind the talent. So front plate would be anything in AR space, anything in front of the talent. So basically you have to split out your 3D scene to the things that you want in front of the person and things that you want in the back. Usually this is the selling point of making things more believable. If you see something crossing in front of a person, you sort of feel that he's a little bit more immersed in that space. So for that, we actually have even a small template available for you. So once you launch Notch, there's a welcome screen, templates, and in the templates, this is called Virtual Production Simple. So what does this contain? This contains a small setup of things that are in the front plate and in the back plate. And we can double check and see those things if we set it to render side by side. Now, it's a little bit cramped because I'm locked in a HD format, but we're squeezing two HD side by side. So here on the left, we have the back plate, and here on the right, we have a front plate. Now, for the sake of making things a little bit clearer, just for now, I'm gonna make sure that this is a bit wider arrangement, so we see both proper 16:9ers. So anything connected to the root is definitely rendering as a backplate or regular scene. Anything connected to the render layer is what we consider to be rendered in the front plate. So from now on, we are using render layers to direct what is in the front plate, what is in the back, and you can actually preview what is actually piped into one and the other. And connecting and reshuffling things is just as easy as selecting a 3D object. In this case, I'm going to select this human. I'm going to unhook it from the root, and I'm going to hook it through the render layer. So there it is. Now it's in the front plate. As easy as that. Now, there might be cases where you are not sure should it be in the front or back plate, or you might need a dynamic object that moves in and out. Obviously, this introduces quite a few challenges, so you should be aware that you will have to do a really good calibration job in Media Server if you're having objects moving in and out. But for that, we have an extra node, which is called Select Render Layer for Child Nodes. So here you can actually choose the connected object should it be rendered in the front or back plate. In this case, as you see, this Select Render Layer has a child, which is a shape 3D. And now I'm toggling this shape 3D back and front. I can do the same thing with my little human shape here as well. So I'm going to connect it there, and as you see now I have a toggle. Not only we have a toggle, we actually have a proximity indicator. So as you see, as the red color is going back and forward, this proximity allows us to choose what goes to front and what goes to the back. This is extremely handy if you connect it to the camera, for instance, or you have an external trigger via MIDI or C, you name it, whichever the triggering system you need or want. There are a couple of extra properties. I don't want to expand too much on this. Ryan is probably already on a handle to drop a link to a tutorial specifically about this. Do go and check it out, but this is the basics of the render layers for front and back plate. Before we move on, I'm just going to mention that it's important to know how to treat color gradings. So for now, I'm going to delete this color LUT. And you will notice that if I grab a color LUT from the resources and I apply it on the root, it applies only on the backplate. It doesn't affect render layer, rightly so, because we're having two render paths. So if you want to use this LUT on both front and back, you just have to make a copy and connect it to the front as well. But now, if I come back to the root, and I just check it regularly, well, probably I should go ahead and change the setup here back to the 1920. You will notice that all of a sudden this LUT adds an extra layer of color processing. And that's normal because we're adding a separate pass on top of the first pass. But this is absolutely not desired. So to fix that, majority of nodes, or at least the color processing nodes, have two properties. So it's applied to solid geometry only. We're going to tick that on. It's not as relevant as the second one. The second one is applied to filled pixels only. So with that ticked on, now it's applying only where there's fills in this space. There we go. I think that illustrates it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's front plate and back plate. What else do we got in the design prep?
So I was also going to mention, it sort of goes in with this a little bit. When you populate your scenes with assets, a good thing to do is populate the assets where the talent is. So as in, you want all your nice detailed areas to be around the talent, or the majority of your assets within the view of the talent. So where the camera is going to be panning most. The scene that Armin's showing right now, we've got a lot of things off to the right-hand side and the left-hand side, and that's because we had different camera viewpoints to look at different stage areas. But when you build a scene, what you don't want to be doing is putting all your assets into somewhere like the roof space or where you're not going to see it. It's always nice to put lots of light fittings and things like that in the roof to make it look more realistic, or fittings on the walls and things like that. But if you can't see them, you're going to have a lot of overhead for not much gain. So put your assets where they're going to be seen, or the majority of them, or your hero assets where they're going to be seen.
I will expand a little bit on what Will is saying. So what makes a good stage design, let's say for a TV broadcast scenario, is the different depth levels. When I say different depth levels, notice that we have ramps here for the platforms on the sides and actually a platform here for the center. So having a little bit raised up surfaces, having some columns around, even having some fixtures or vent docks on the roof, they don't have to be high quality at all. That already makes scene a little bit more intriguing, a little bit more appealing and believable, because let's face it, TV production rooms, even the crazy 3D scenes, they always are filled with details. real world is filled with details. So all these small things you should always keep in mind. Right. Anything more on the building scenes, or are we moving on to optimizing?
Optimization.
Optimization.
I love optimization.
We are very happy to have Will, because optimization usually sounds off as a curse word more than a blessing.
I think, the whole sort of premise of optimization is it's a workflow rather than something you leave to the last moment. We were discussing this earlier. Optimization should be thought like from the very beginning of the scene setup. It shouldn't be something you do right at the end. We haven't got enough frame rate, or the milliseconds are like going through the roof. Optimization should be done the thought behind what you want to optimize should be done as you build the level, from gray box right through to being at the actual location on the LED screen.
With that said,
it's really important.
I think it's important to establish your target. So let's talk about the target then, because you might be building something on a crazy PC setup that you have in your studio. For instance, I'm running here 2080 Ti, which back in the day, more or less half a year ago, was really nice graphics card. Well, they changed very rapidly, wouldn't you agree, Will? Anyways, this is a good card, but maybe this is not the card that Media Server will be running. So we actually have a tool to double check the performance in your system against the system that you're going to be running on location. Let me pull that out. There we go. So it's called performance, and here you see the local GPU and CPU, and you can actually see the estimated target. Now, when I say target, you can choose a majority of Media Server vendors that we integrated with here as a pull-out list, and you can see majority of graphics cards available here. So just for the kicks of it, I'm gonna go for something small. Let's say the sky is 2x2. And here I see the target GPU on that Media Server, and it's not shiny. If I wanted to run this on 2x2, I would have to make an insane optimization work. But to see where I'm going, you actually have a little tool to double check on your scene towards the target. Two things to remember here. First thing is that even if you hit a good number here, it doesn't mean that that's the allowance that you have, because your Media Server operator or on-location team has to consider 250 different things. Video feeds going in, video feeds going out, camera trackings. Yep. This all eats processing, so you should always leave some headroom. So if you're a Media Server operator, be mean. Set a cruel performance target in milliseconds and say that you should never exceed it. Number two, I would advise you to lie. I know it sounds horrible, but this is an interesting tip that I've gotten from one of our founders of Notch. He was working in the gaming industry too as a developer, and he said that back in the day when he was developing an engine, he would give only half of the capacity of the engine to the design on our team.
That's normal.
And of course they would hit the threshold, and then they would freak out that there's no more performance, and then he would reveal that there's 50% more that they can go. So basically, well, you don't have to do that, but allow yourself, squeeze yourself to a point where you can deliver, and if you have overhead, always leave that margin of overhead available for yourself.
Yep. But on top of that, we have actually, we've got some pretty good optimization helping tools. Obviously, one of them is bake lighting, or baking the lighting in if you've got static lighting. That optimization tool is just so important, especially if you use things like skylights or if you use path trace lighting, or if you have a lot of lights with shadows and things like that to bake the lighting in. You may not think it at the time, but it's just going to save you quite a lot of overhead of GPU processing by baking it. And what happens is when you bake the lighting, you're turning the actual GPU performance into just textures, so it looks exactly the same, but it's just turned into textures, and your file size, your DFX will be a little bit bigger, but it will run so much better. So baked lighting is a very important optimization process that you should do as you're putting the scene together. It's really cool.
I'm going to jump the gun a little bit here. I have both nodes that I want to talk about pulled in already. Okay. I'm going to make you a small demo. I have bake lighting that we'll mention, but before I connect bake lighting, I will mention that we have another node that came in handy with the latest release, which is freeze geometry.
I was just about to mention it.
I'm not going to make justice talking about freeze geometry, so I'm going to allow Will explain freeze geometry a little bit, and then I'm going to give you a small demo of both nodes working hand in hand, making your scene faster.
Yep. So the freeze geometry node is very handy. A lot of these architectural scenes, the best way to build an architectural scene like the one we've got on screen now is to use lots of individual pieces, like Lego pieces. It's a sort of very gamey technique where you build a floor piece and then you can shuffle it about and duplicate it to make bigger floors, and then you surround it by edging pieces, and then you have things like the stage pieces, all the wall pieces. They're all individual pieces. Same pieces a lot, but they're all individual objects.
Chunks. Let's be more interesting. Chunks.
And then things like you've got all your wall pillars and all bits in the roof. All those objects are going to create a lot of nodes and a lot of high object count within your scene. So we've developed a freeze geometry node, and what that does is it'll take groups of objects and combine them into one mesh, but it's a non-destructive pass, meaning that you can still work on your objects, your multiple pieces. You can go back and forth, change them, redo layouts, things like that, and then apply the freeze geometry node again just by simply hiding it and unhiding it. And it will create one mesh that will make if you look on the screen now, you've got, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 objects there. All those 9 objects will be turned into one freeze geometry node, which will save you on the GPU of all the overhead of all the objects, and on the CPU in your node graph for the actual nodes being in the node graph. And it may sound minor, but if you do that on a couple of hundred nodes and you're only using 20 freeze geometry nodes, it's quite a reduction in or quite a help, an improvement in performance when you do things like that.
I see that we have Control Chaos in chat. I hope I'm pronouncing your handle correctly. It's good to have you here, mate. You are a regular guest in our streams, and we really appreciate that. You are asking if frozen geometry still... I'm going to read out the question. Can frozen geometry still be animated in space with transforms, or is it totally locked in position? It is rather locked in position. That's the whole point. You solidified non-dynamic object. You just locked it in, so you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to spend any more processing on it. So not only it saves processing in general, but Notch actually considers the number of nodes that are available in the node graph. So the smaller the number of nodes you have, the better off CPU-wise you are. So that's just one more reason to use freeze geometry for things that are completely static. So I think it's good time now to go a little bit more hands-on. Let me just show you quickly how to set up the freeze geometry. So I have all these 3D pieces, and I'm going to connect it straight to the first input freeze geometry sources. I'm going to hit Control R to connect the freeze geometry to the root. And as you see, the icons all of a sudden changed. So all of these pieces of geometry now are completely locked. They are not moving anymore, but they're costing much less CPU-wise. So what is the benefit? What is the extended benefit of freeze geometry? Well, freeze geometry actually makes unique UV maps. So basically, if we have 9 elements connected to the freeze geometry, we will have a grid, a square of 9 smaller squares filled in with unique UVs for every single unit connected to it.
It will tile the UVs from the original objects within the UV space of the freeze geometry. So if you have 4, it will tile them nicely, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have 5, it will tile it once more, and you might get a few blank areas, but it doesn't matter too much. It's only taking up a little bit more of the texture space.
I'm just going to mention that we can further illustrate this by maybe making a small light bake. So let's do that. It's going to be very visual then if we have that. So in the light baking, I'll just remind you guys, or I'll just mention that I turned on ray tracing. I didn't have ray tracing on in this scene. So for the purpose of light baking, I wanted ray tracing on. So I have it on. Now in the light baking node, I'm going to make some changes. So first of all, I really want the post filter light maps to be ticked on. That helps a little bit with well, Will, maybe you can explain better what it is.
So the post filter light map just it means you can use smaller texture maps, light map textures, because it will add a slight blur to your to the noise, the ray trace noise within that light map. So having it on just saves you having to have more refines or bigger texture maps.
So I'm not gonna go crazy with the size. I'm just gonna make sure that this is double. So ×2. I feel like a developer. I feel like a hacker. Notch can do small math problems inside of the UI.
Awesome.
I'm not gonna give more refines. I think 50 is enough. I'll hit bake now. Here I can define where should the file go. So I could easily just make it go on the desktop. I'm gonna have an option to choose refine passes. I can even make presets, and I will hit OK. So now we are light baking. As mentioned, we see 9 tiles, 9 unique UVs. I'm gonna bring it back because we can preview this. So freeze geometry node not only solidifies the geometry that makes it cost less, it actually preserves the UVs, which is great.
Yep. Especially you can turn ray tracing off now because it's all done. All the lighting's baked in. One thing that I feel it's very important to mention before we move on is the stacking order of the frozen nodes. Yes, definitely.
If I move the nodes around a little bit, I'm going to tick this off, you will see that all of a sudden the baked lighting paths gonna start looking a little bit weird.
I think if you hit back.
Yeah, so you see we have black spots. Why on earth do we have these black spots or errors? Well, it's because all of a sudden freeze geometry panel arrangement of these 9 cubes changed as well. So if you are repositioning them in viewport or in the node graph,
it's just a different order.
You have to rebake. Always remember to rebake. Again, this applies if you are changing it in an actual 3D space, hence viewport. And this applies if you're changing the stacking order in the node graph.
Yeah, it's also no different if you add more geometry to that freeze geometry node. You'll have to then rebake the lighting because obviously the freeze geometry will generate a new set of UVs every time an asset's added to it or removed from it. So whenever you do things like that, adding or taking away assets from freeze geometry, the UV set will change. So just bear that in mind.
Another exciting, I'm very liberal with exciting. Another thing that I really like in Bake Lighting node is a small advancement that was made that makes leaps and bounds for workflow speed, which is Bake Lighting to object options. Basically, if you have several Bake Lightings, you can either bake them all or bake the selected ones. You select several and you hit bake for those ones. This is exciting because there are many packages out there that actually bakes light, but this is a process where you have to bake everything. In our case, you can select what you bake. So that's where we are pinging back to the statement that you can have a mixed scene with baked things or the solid things and dynamic things. So this helps a lot.
Yeah, another really important process is when you're off site, you can bake the whole scene in one go, and depending on your lighting setup or how many refines you've set up, it could take a few hours to bake a big project. If you go onto site and there's a couple of assets you want to move or delete from the scene for some reason, because you've got these bake light options, you can delete your assets and just bake in that area locally. So select a couple of objects that have shadows still on them if something's been deleted, and just bake either 1 or 2 objects or that one surface, and you can do that remotely and it's a lot quicker. If you're stuck on location having to rebake your whole scene, that's a lot of time that nobody's doing anything.
So since Will mentioned the keyword, the code word for optimization, which is delete, I'll just mention a couple of more options that allows you to clean the house a little bit and make sure that at the bare minimum your files loads faster. So when I say clean the house, always make sure to delete the nodes that are not connected to anything. There's absolutely no reason for them to populate node graph. In this case I have one, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Good housekeeping, people will appreciate that when they get your files, and you yourself will understand things better. So obviously naming conventions, regions, all of that helps. Another interesting thing, now we're going to talk a little bit about resources. In the resources, you have a property to remove unused resources. You likely have a ton of geometry that you pulled in, pulled out, tried out, didn't work. Get rid of it all because it's embedded. It's loading up every time you're starting the FX file. So just take it all out. Press that button. Everything that is not being used in any of the layers will be gone. One more thing is optimization of your stills, of your textures. So for instance, here I have a stack of JPEGs. So instead of JPEGs, I could easily have DDS files. DDS files is so much better when it comes to size. You don't lose any quality, but you gain a lot of size. So for that, we have a property. So if you right click and go for the naming convention of the actual asset you pressed on, you will see that you have 3 options: compressed to DXT1, 5, and BC4. Most likely you're gonna go for DXT5. That's my usual go-to. So notice the difference of the resources size. In this case, it's 31.6 megabytes. I'm gonna press on that and I'm gonna convert it. 7.9. That's a reasonable increase in space or decrease in size of the file. So this process I would encourage you guys to do all the time, but just don't do that for HDRs. That's just not gonna pan out well. Speaking from horrible experience. You can experiment, but don't do that.
The same with light maps as well. If they're using high dynamic range for the lights, or if you're using high dynamic range for the lighting in your scene, don't compress the light maps either.
Yeah, you'll regret it.
So
there are 2 things. Sorry, I'd like to bring up just quickly. One of them, you mentioned with the freeze geometry that it locks off the input geometry, but that's the thing, is it only locks off the input geometry. You can move the freeze geometry node with transforms, but remember that lights, baked lighting and stuff like that isn't going to update. So you can move it, but just keep in mind that you're just basically moving a static thing. So while dynamic lights will update, all the baked stuff won't. So keep that in mind.
Good point.
The other thing is sort of a question for me. I'm curious, how many objects should you put into a freeze geometry? Is it something where you can just pipe in everything and then deal with a huge baked lighting light map, or do you want to think about, well, we only want about 9 here and we can go more here and less here? So what do you think?
Yeah, the idea behind the freeze geometry is the pieces that we created for this scene are quite low poly, and it's better to have objects that start at around 2000 polys. Notch prefers that sort of render count, so anything under 2000 polys is going to be, you can imagine it's sort of rounded up to 2000 polys, even if it's like 100 poly box or something. So the best thing to do is really low poly assets is combine as many as you can up to around 2k polys into one freeze geometry node. Or there's another way of looking at it. If you want to freeze geometry certain objects or areas in your map, like Armin has done here, he's done that whole piece of stage floor there. That piece of floor that if you wanted reflections only on that floor, it's all one piece of geometry, so it's easier to handle, it's easier to understand if he wants to bake that bit of lighting, or if he wants to add animated lighting onto that, he knows how to connect it up. And
I'll raise my hand and jump in before I forget, because that's probably quite good to mention too. Depending on what reflective system you're using, RT mirror reflection, screen space reflection, doesn't really matter. For instance, I'm just going to pull this node in. Screen space reflection. Notice that every single reflecting node has an input for affected objects. And I think that's important to mention because this eats performance. So reflect only the things that are necessary to reflect. Will, maybe you want to expand on that a little bit.
So basically you've got to think about it. If you have your screen space reflections on in the scene, pretty much every object in the scene will reflect. And there's a lot of things that just don't need to reflect. So the less screen space reflections you have on the screen, the better the performance. So I would always reflect shiny floors. I would never reflect roofs. I tend not to reflect walls. Metallic objects, of course, you've got to reflect them. But if they're at the sides of the location, don't bother reflecting them. I think a rule of thumb is if you can have like maybe the bottom third of the screen reflecting only, you're going to get a lot better performance than say half. So it's basically how much reflections are taking up the actual camera view.
Another handy tip for, sorry, Will, if...
That's fine.
So another handy tip for reflections, notice that they cost different depending on where the camera is. So I don't think we're going to see much difference here because this is such a light scene. But once you're preparing file for show, make sure to zoom in to the places that you will zoom in with the camera production. And if it has a lot of reflections, track your performance, because the performance might dip or increase depending on the camera position. Obviously, whatever is not visible through the camera is being culled out. But whatever is visible, if it's really reflective, there's a lot of reflection surface, it's going to cost more. It's going to crunch a little bit harder. So the main tool for optimization, this is probably the profiler. I'm certain you guys already know about this. If not, there's a tutorial about it. Check it out. I think Ryan will drop a link. Quickly, I'll just mention that once you enable profiler, you see the performance of your nodes in the node graph. If a node has a numeric value, that means it's actually costing to run. It's actually costing milliseconds to produce. First digits are GPU. The second digits are CPU. And once you see those digits, you can make a choice on what do you want to change, what do you want to optimize. So you slash and cut the nodes that actually has numeric values until you get to the good performance. Two things to remember. Once you have profiler on, your performance goes down because there's extra computation in the background. Make the optimizations, turn it off, see the digits, turn it back again, repeat the cycle as many times as you need. Second thing, once the design is running in Notch, it's likely costing more than it would if it was running as a block, because block is just a design and engine, period. And here we have the whole UI with a ton of variables. So keep that in mind when you're targeting performance. I'm going to quickly mention that we have a small tool for you to double check your true performance of the block if the media server is not available. If you head to your Windows drive program files, let's see, Notch folder, you will see that you have a FX player host DirectX 1164 executable. So this little tool right here allows you to play back the blocks. So you load in the block, you set up the necessary or wanted resolution, and you will have a readout of milliseconds per frame, FPS, so on and so forward. If there's any parameters open, you will see them here. So this is a tool for you to double check things before you send it away to a media server operator.
It's a very, very handy tool. Very handy tool. We use this all the time when we're doing VP.
It's a true definition of the performance. So if you have a block, you test it out on a media server, you're not happy with the numbers, you want to make sure, is it the media server side of things that is costing, maybe camera inputs or outputs, whatever that would be, or is it Notch block? Drop it here, see the raw, real digits.
And if you've exposed the camera, you can move about with the exposed camera as well and have a look at certain areas to see if they're taking up more or less performance. You can move it back and forth, see how much the reflections are taking up. Another good tip is whenever you run this, maybe close other windows, other Notch windows, and maybe any high use applications when you're running it, just to get a true idea of how the performance is.
So we are crunching through a ton of information here, and I'm going to quickly mention two things that hopefully will come handy. First of all, if you have questions about any things that we're talking about here, please post it in the chat. We are keeping track of all the questions. I'm sure Ryan will bring them out in the end of the stream. Second thing, that the virtual production will come out as e-learning course early next year. So a lot of the things that we're talking here and many more will be included in that course. So you will have a backbone, a good structure to help you to work with your virtual productions. So this is just a first initiative when we were talking about virtual productions. We wanted to do something on the spot. We wanted to just talk to you guys, and that's what we're doing here. But we will have a proper e-learning school about virtual productions as well. Right. Anything else to add?
Yes.
Shoot.
There's one more important thing. When you build all your scenes and put it together, you need to really, really nail the performance before you go on location. It's really important that you think about that. Once you're on location, you're going to have, we've still got things you can do, but you can have a lot less things you can do on location. If that's not hitting the right frame rates, then there's a good chance you won't hit the frame rate or the desired frame rate that you want. So We did that with our scenes when we shot these. We got them all running at a decent frame rate. When we went to the shoot, the guys who put them up on screen were like, whoa, it's running, it's brilliant. And that's because we had planned it. We went out there, we decided we were going to hit an X amount resolution. We wanted to run it at X frame rate. We hit those frame rates before we got to location. It's really important. That's about it for that.
Well, since you mentioned on location, I think this is a good time to talk about pre-on location checklist. This is just a mental list that you should tick off before you leave the house, leave the studio, leave the working environment. Obviously, checking it up in a FX player for the performance, that's probably one of the things you should do. That's definitely going to that list. Sure. You guys, do you want to expand on that list?
Well, we mentioned exposing properties earlier, and just making sure that all of them work is a good thing. Making sure that they are appropriately named and they're in places that you're actually going to go and look, and also that they're things you're actually going to go and use. There's no point, as we said before, exposing properties to move things if you're going to be freezing them anyway, because A, you're not going to see them move, and B, you don't want them to move. That was the whole point of freezing them. So yeah, that kind of thing is a good start.
I think now it's a good time then to talk about on-location work, because as mentioned in the beginning of the stream, 50% of the work is in studio, and then the other 50, which is probably crunched to a smaller amount of time, is on location, because things change. Our director might come up with different ideas, all those things. And all those things are to be considered, and it can be addressed. So we spoke about exposing parameters. I'm still standing with the statement that was made in the beginning. Expose only parameters that you're going to use for actual show running. All the other things should be done via network editing. We have a tool called Network Connections. You can log into a specific block that is playing back in a media server or to executable, you name it. There's a tutorial about that. I'm sure Ryan will drop a link, but in ever so briefness, I'm going to mention that you type in the IP address of the machine you're targeting, or you just type in localhost if this is the same machine you're running, and then from Builder you can make alterations to your block in media server. So anything you move, anything you recolor or change will be reflected. So that's exactly how you finish up your virtual production work. If there was a prop of a chair and you don't need it anymore, hide it. If our director says, I want different floor material, you can deliver that. You can even bake via network connection. But one thing to mention before I pass the mic to Will is all the changes you're making are only reflected. So make sure to save it, re-export, and overwrite the block. That's crucial. Yes, Will.
I was just going to say it's a really handy tool because we can live network edit. You can do things like move the cameras about so you can rotate your scene, things like that. But you can also, if your talent is in a spot where there's objects that you don't think work with the talent or the wrong scale or need to be deleted because you want to put the talent somewhere, you can do that with live editing. You can move all the stuff live. And then because obviously we've got the different baking techniques, you can then rebake stuff really quickly and then turn over that new block quite quickly whilst everyone's there commenting on the work and stuff. So it's a really, really good workflow.
So another thing to mention here, where let's say network editing would come in very handy, is again the real world physical limitations. Obviously we'll need to light up your talents. How does those lights correlate with the virtual lighting? These should align, or at the very minimum they should somehow reflect each other and not clash. So if you're having a lighting from the left hand side and the shadows are dropping, you shouldn't have an actual light dropping from the opposite, because that's going to be obviously a throw off. Like people will understand that this is something is wrong there.
Yeah, like I wouldn't worry about getting things to 3 significant figures or whatever, but you definitely need to get like within a ballpark of being in the right place. Otherwise it just looks so off. And you can see it when it's done wrong as well. You can really see it.
And that's another thing. When you're on site, I'll go back to optimizations again. Because you've done all your optimization beforehand, what you want to be doing on site is getting the talent dressed up in the location, lit and shadowed or whatever. You want to be doing things like that. You don't want to be waiting around for someone to re-optimize their scene, rebake it, things like that. You want to be past that. You want to be going for the shoot. You want to use your time wisely.
Since Will mentioned optimization, I'm going to come back to optimization as well. There's one more node or advancement in Notch that came out at the latest release that we haven't spoken of, and this is a good time to speak about it. It's caching of materials. This right here is very, very nice way to reduce the numbers of nodes and to bump up the performance. Now, this should be definitely done on location, because once you're caching in your materials, you're saying, I am done altering this object, because this is a destructive workflow. Hence, once you cache it in, it's done. It's cached.
Yep.
So, a thing that I do if I find myself in a situation where I'm not certain if I'm actually done, I would make a copy of the material.
I do that too.
Obviously, you don't have to have all the texture maps connected externally, but just for the showcase purposes, I have done that. Usually, you would just drop it in via drop-downs.
Yeah, it depends if you want some post effects on those. So if you've got lots of post effects on those layers or those textures.
Yeah, and actually, it's worthy to point out that the reason why I'm connecting these in the first place externally is because I might want to make some tweaks to it. So all the post effects are applicable to all texture maps as they are. So you can tweak and work with them as much as you like. Now I'm just gonna quickly mention that this geometry is just a sphere. So we basically are displacing in accordance to displacement map via material properties. So let's say I'm completely happy with this and Will approved it. He said, Armin, best job you ever did.
Go for it.
Go for it. So all you have to do is right click and go for material options, and you have several options. Cache material, cache all, cache selected, just like with baking. So I'm going to cache material, and as you see, all the connections are unlinked from the material. And if I preview how the material looks, all of it is now stored in this node.
Yep.
So this is very nice optimization tool towards the end of your process.
Yep. And you delete all the original nodes. And the reason this is a good optimization, I don't know whether he said, this really helps with the milliseconds, the performance of that rather than the GPU. So number of nodes within your node graph is really important for making sure the CPU runs well. So the less nodes you have on your node graph, the better.
Will, can you ballpark the number of nodes for optimal setup?
Depending, it very much depends on your project. For the bigger projects we were using, we were looking for around 250 nodes, which is not that many. So that's why freeze geometry is very, very helpful. I think the original object count for the freeze geometry is several hundred objects. We got that down to about 20, 30, maybe 20 freeze geometry nodes. And then with the caching of the materials as well, there were some very complex materials in there. Materials actually took up a lot of nodes with all the post effects and stuff on all the different textures. So around 250, maybe pushing 300. But if your scene's running pretty well anyway, that's not going to matter too much. It's just for the really heavy sort of 3D scenes that need a lot of this help.
So while Will was expanding on this subject, I'll just mention that I briefly glanced on the chat, and I see there's some questions coming in. I really appreciate that, and I'm going to address the one that I actually see on screen before we move on, and that's from Daniel. He's asking, can I overwrite the block while the media server is running? Yes and no. So this is directly responding with the integration that media server offers. Majority of media servers probably has that property, but you should probably double check with the media server of your choice. I can vouch certainly that Disguise allows you to overwrite while running. This is depending on the media server. This is their side of the integration, just so you know.
Yeah, I was actually typing up an answer to that, so good thing that you brought it up. Basically, the key thing is whether the media server supports hot loading, because you can't just save what you're doing live in what you're doing locally in Builder over onto the block. So what you need to do is re-export the block, and that's where it depends on whether your media server supports basically live updating of a block and then it quickly swapping out in real time.
Talking about
I don't know which ones do or don't, so you'll have to go and check yourself.
Talking about offerings from media servers, we have tools from our side to make your life easier. Depending on the media server, they might be available or not available. Again, that's their integration side. For instance, again, I'll vouch that Disguise, for instance, definitely supports this tool. It's called Exposable Camera. Likely you will need a camera that you will be able to connect to Stipe or Encam or whichever the tracking system that you're going to be using. Instead of exposing all the parameters of a regular camera, like the rotations and positions, you can expose the exposable camera's camera value. So this one property here, and then you will be able to take it over in media server. Now, again, some of the media servers directly supports this node, some of them that don't, so you just have to double check and see whichever the media server you're using. And if they don't, feel free to ping media server support and say, like, we are using Notch, we would really like this feature, please make it happen this Christmas time around the corner. In this same bracket of exposable camera, we have exposable null too, so I'm just gonna mention that that's there. Regular null would have all the positional, rotational values, and you would have to expose them one by one. In this case, you just expose one property and you are good. So this is specific to media servers though, so just double check that before you send it off to a on-location work. Right, gentlemen, anything else to mention for the on-location work? If not, then I would be very happy to go through some questions and answer some questions. And I see that we are already in 1.5 hour time. So
I was just going to go through a few little optimization tips that you can do on site.
Sure.
So we've already discussed caching materials. If you are stuck and you really need to optimize so you can cache all your materials, delete all the nodes, you've also got to think about how many dynamic lights for shadows and things. If you do have dynamic lights in your scene, maybe reduce the number of those. It's always good to reduce the number of objects. That's going to help as well in your scene, either by freeze geometry, putting more objects together, or just removing some. A lot of these things are destructive, so once you've done it, you can't really go back on it. And then the last thing is, as we discussed before, delete all unnecessary nodes on your node graph. I know Notch is so good like that. You can just put loads and loads of node graphs to get nodes on your node graph to get what you're trying to do. It's quite artistic in that sense, but because they build up, they are going to affect CPU. So delete them where you can.
Yeah, one thing I don't think we've really mentioned yet is like one of the optimizations is like not just reducing the number of objects, which are my cat's joined me.
I was about to point that out.
I will get the door in a second. One of the things that you should do is not just reduce the number of objects, not just reduce the number of objects which are reflective or transparent and things like that, but also changing the different methods for reflection. So something Armin and I were playing Mario Kart the other day, and it's a beautiful looking game, and there's no screen space reflections, ray tracing, there's nothing. It's just environment mapping, and it looks brilliant, and you don't notice it because it's already a great looking art style and really well placed assets. And you can see that in almost any game in AAA space. Even the new Spider-Man game, if you turn off the advanced reflections mode, it just goes through and it uses environment mapping. You don't notice it until someone tells you that it's there. Tells you what it's doing.
This is actually a very good point. I'm going to go a little bit on the side and give a tangent while Ryan is sorting out his cat. A lot of techniques and common knowledge should be drawn from the gaming industry in this specific realm. So if you have a mate who is working in gaming industry, take him out or her out for a coffee or a beer. There's going to be abundance of knowledge now. Will is presenting us with so many things that he would consider being 101 in the realm of gaming. And for me, for instance, as a designer for screen productions for live events, some of these things are absolutely new, so I'm very happy to learn about those. So with that said, if any questions, please in the chat.
There's a huge crossover at the moment with games as well. I mean, there are identical industries, especially with this the virtual production stuff. It's identical to gaming workflow. So gaming outsource companies they'll know how to build things like this perfectly for you, how to create the assets for you. So they're exactly the same kind of people as well. It's exactly the same sort of industry. So contact those guys as well if you need help, or you need artists, or you need assets and things made for you.
Yeah. So are we done with the on location list? Do you guys think there's something more to mention, or are we shooting for questions?
One more thing very quickly is, whenever you do things like this, you've obviously got in your head what you want and what you know, and when you build this art, it's very easy to get like, this is your baby and you don't want to change it much. But what you've got to think is beyond that. When you do optimizations and stuff, people won't know what the original artwork looked like. So if it's still looking good, don't worry about it. Don't worry about deleting bits of objects in the scene, or don't worry about changing the colors or reducing the reflections. People won't know what it should have looked like originally, so they'll accept it anyway. So don't always worry about doing things like that. You've got to get that optimal philosophy in your head that it's better to have something running really well than not at all. So it's really important.
Unfortunately, performance takes precedent over design in this world.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think we've all learned that lesson at some point, of being like, I love this little thing. I love this thing. I just wanted to keep it. And it's like, no, because nobody else knows about it. It's just you who cares.
Yeah.
Just let it go.
It's still going to look awesome. It's still going to look brilliant.
Yeah.
But those little details that you just don't know whether you want to get rid of, just do it. It's done. It works. The performance is brilliant. Just go for it, and then shoot the show.
Yeah.
Questions and answers. Is that where we are now?
Yep.
I'm going to open up with the one that I actually see on screen. So I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry if I don't. Mateusz is asking, how can I make actor a reflection on the floor? How can I make actor's reflection visible? How can I make the reflection of the actor be visible on the floor in a 3D scene? So we covered this in the beginning of the stream. If you have a green screen and you need to reflect, all you have to do is find the right layer first. There we go. And make sure that you're using RT mirror reflections. As soon as you add that and you enable the ray tracing on the root, you will be able to drop the reflections off your image plane.
Yeah.
It's we've built a fast pass for these things, so you can now use it, and it looks awesome. And it's any alpha blended geometry as well. It's not just the image plane.
I'll just remind you guys that guys and girls, that we have a blur option as well, so it doesn't have to be just
roughness. That's to set the roughness off.
Yes.
Yep. And talking about reflections again, if we're talking about reflections for LED screen, a simple trick is to use a reflective floor or reflective LED panels on the floor in the scene, and then you'll get the talent reflecting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Take advantage of the actual physical properties. So if you foresee a floor that you want to have reflections on, make sure to hire in an LED screen that actually has that property, that's glass surfaced. If you want to avoid that, that might be an option too. Notice that there are some demos, some virtual productions out there that has a cool stage design, a big carpet, and a couch on the carpet. The carpet is there not because it's the best looking carpet the set designers could find. It's actually a way to cheat the setup, so you don't have to see the missing, misaligned or whatnot reflections of a person, of the actual talent.
You get free ambient occlusion as well, and you get free shadows.
Yep, I heard that sand simulations with the actual dirt on the floor is really good too.
Yep. But yeah, always take advantage of real world stuff as well. Don't rely just on the CG world to do all the things. Some things aren't possible, but you can do it within the in the real world.
I think the best blend is a mix. So if you manage to mix the real world scenarios with the virtual production that you're building, you're winning.
Well, one thing I've seen done a few times is intentionally lining up the corners of things to go in line with the LED walls, because it can be a real problem trying to just make sure that blend comes through. Whereas if you just put two corners there, if there's not a blend, it just looks normal anyway. It's looking at every single possible solution to get.
Yeah. So while Ryan is
I was just going to say another quick trick is if you don't get those shiny LED panels, then even look at the surface of your LED. If you make that area where the talent's going to stand a different color, like a darker color or something, then you'll get the reflection showing up naturally anyway.
Or so as in this case, in this scene, you might as well just make a ramp and give it a completely different material or different surface, and you should be much better off than you were in the first place.
Yeah.
So while Ryan is skimming through the questions, I'm sure he's keeping track on that. I'm just going to quickly mention that we are releasing a virtual production e-learning course early next year. So all things we've spoken here, many more, will be discussed and available there in that course. And of course, if you're interested in any of the things that we've seen on my screen here, 95% of things is available via a VP page that we made specifically for virtual productions in Notch. So if you go notch.one/VP or virtual productions, you will be able to download all these files, use it for your advantage, any shape and form you like. Yes, questions?
I have one question from right at the start, and then I haven't seen any more come through. So if you want to get a question in, now would be a very good time.
You could easily ask what AAA game was Will working on when he was working in the gaming industry. That's a valid question too. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Formula. I know Ryan is into football. We're open for questions. just saying.
So so the question is, and I saved it because it's a bit tricky, I think. How would you apply use a green screen and a camera tracking in the same sort of scenario? What difficulties and what do you think you would have to do to overcome those problems? Because they're two things that, like, off the top of my head, they would not go well together. They camera tracking always wants to look around things, and green screen very much wants to be one place and one perspective. So, did you both have any thoughts?
Will, lead.
Pardon?
Will, start, if you don't mind.
I think, well, the thing is, when you do stuff like that, you've got to try it out, see how it looks for a start, see whether the geometry works with it within the 3D scene, whether the camera tracking works on the green screen. I don't see why it wouldn't work. So I think it would work fine. I don't see problems there. It's a matter of testing it and seeing what happens when you do it. If you can, I wouldn't do it live. Test it beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing is, I think I might be picturing the wrong thing in my head. I just sort of think the moment you want to start moving the camera is the moment that the talent is now moving along with the LED. Yeah, and that's where you start having problems. So you have to like counter animate. And if there's one thing I remember from uni, it's that counter animating things is the wrong solution every time, unless you're desperate.
I'm gonna quickly jump in and mention just the fact that we are not based on NVIDIA's ray tracing. We actually have our own ray tracer. So even if you're using GTX cards or AMD cards, you actually can ray trace and bake things in Notch. This is our own proprietary system. Because I'm skimming through the chat and I see there's some conversation
V-Ray
about
or anything else. This is Notch.
Although if you wanted to bake stuff in V-Ray, you could, and then bring it in and add those light maps into the diffuse channel. You can do that as well. You can bake stuff externally if you really want to.
To be honest, you can build everything externally and just use Notch as a playback system if that is your choice. Like if you are a Cinema 4D user, we support Cinema 4D files directly. Maya user, FBX, 3ds Max, same thing. I would imagine that if we talk about Houdini, that would be Alembic, because we support Alembic. So you can use tools that you're comfortable with for modeling and assembling and baking, and then just drop it in Notch for the final push. That's a valid workflow. Some people choose to do that. Okay, anything else?
Let's see. No, I think we're good.
So with that said, I'm just gonna come back to the initial statement that we have the VP page available specifically for virtual productions available online now. And Ryan will drop a link in the chat. And in the beginning of this stream, we watched a highlight reel from that VP page. So I will play it back towards the very end of this. I think this is the time where we say our goodbyes. I'm going to quickly mention that Will was working on Gotham series, Batman games. Thank you for asking.
Arkham series.
Arkham series.
Had Gotham in it. But it's the Arkham trilogy.
Awesome. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being with us throughout this stream. Thank you for all the questions. And we look forward to come back with yet another stream in short time.
Guys. Yeah, and a special thanks to Will for joining us.
Yeah, Will, thank you so much.
No problem.
Going a bit into his evening.
I had to fly over to join you in my home studio.
It's just so large, you have to fly from one side to the other.
Yeah, and thank you, Ryan, for keeping track of the chat and keeping us on point. Great stuff.
And thank you, Armin, for driving as usual.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure. All right, guys.
Thank yous all round.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm turning on that highlight reel and I'm saying goodbye to you till next time. See you.
See ya.
Bye.